The black hairdresser had a very simple salon and worked hard every day. She was sad because her daughter's father had left and never returned. One day, a wealthy real estate broker entered that small salon and saw a notebook with bills she couldn't pay and a crumpled photo of the father who disappeared. At that moment, the man understood how much she was suffering, and his hands began to tremble. That's when everything began. The young hairstylist opened her eyes before sunrise. Her back hurt from the worn-out mattress on the floor. She sat up, rubbed her neck, and looked at the small figure sleeping next to her. It was her 5-year-old daughter, curled under a thin blanket. The woman glanced at a cheap clock on the chipped nightstand. She had about an hour before she needed to open the salon. She stood, careful not to wake the child, and stepped into the cramped kitchen area. She turned on a single-burner stove. The flame flickered weakly under the dented kettle. She scooped a spoonful of ground coffee, the cheapest she could afford. The water boiled fast. She poured it into a plastic cup and tasted it. It was bitter and weak, but it was all she had. She would give most of the better share to her daughter. She needed the girl to eat something before school, even if it was just a piece of stale bread. Her daughter stirred in the other room. Soon she entered the tiny kitchen, rubbing her eyes. The hairstylist forced a smile. "Morning," she said, keeping her voice low. The child nodded. The woman handed her the small cup and a half slice of bread. The girl ate in silence. She looked up and noticed how tired her mother appeared. "Mom, you look sad," the child said. The woman avoided the question and focused on brushing the girl's hair. "We have to get going," she said. "You'll be late for school." They left their small apartment, walking down 2 flights of cracked steps. Outside, the street looked rough. Potholes filled with stagnant water. Peeling paint on worn walls. Bare wires crossing overhead. She held her daughter's hand and walked briskly, scanning the empty street. After a few blocks, they reached a small school building with a chipped sign. The little girl entered, waving goodbye, and the mother made her way further down the block. Her salon was 2 doors down from an old bakery that smelled of burnt dough. She unlocked the salon's metal grate and stepped inside. The interior was cramped. 2 old chairs with worn cushions, a cracked mirror, and a shelf with cheap hair products. There was a lingering smell of stale conditioner. She flicked on the overhead light and checked her supplies. Most were low quality. She had to make them last. She took out her account book from a small drawer beneath the cash register. Her hands felt tense. The rent was overdue. The sum stared back at her like a cold fact. She owed more than she had earned in weeks. She closed the book and swallowed hard. She had few customers lately. Most residents were as broke as she was, and those who could afford a proper haircut rarely came here. She tried to keep the place clean and welcoming, but the peeling paint and old chairs sent the wrong message. She knew the landlord would show up soon, pressing her for the rent. The thought tightened her chest. He had warned her more than once. She set the account book aside and reached into a small box under the counter. She found an old photo. It was crumpled and faded. The face of the man in the photo was familiar, though distant now. He was the father of her child, and he had vanished years ago. She studied the picture. His absence still stung. He left her alone to handle everything. Rent, food, a child. She wondered if he ever thought of them or if he felt any guilt. Probably not. The morning dragged on. The street outside was quiet. She stood behind the styling chair, rearranging combs and scissors, hoping someone would walk in. Hours passed. An old neighbor stepped inside just to say hello, and left without spending any money. The hairstylist sighed. She swept the floor, though it was already clean. She wiped the mirror. She reorganized the shelf. She tried to ignore the noise of a passing truck outside, the hum of distant voices. Occasionally, a shadow passed by the window, but no one entered. Around noon, her stomach rumbled. She had nothing substantial to eat. She sipped some water from the tap in the tiny bathroom at the back of the salon. She lingered there, staring at the cracked tile. The silence in the salon was heavy. Time felt slow. She thought about her daughter, probably eating a school lunch that was also not great, but at least the child had something. Soon, the girl would finish her classes and return. The hairstylist would close the salon later and walk home with her daughter, hoping to avoid the landlord for one more day. An hour later, a woman finally entered. She looked uncertain. She asked for a simple haircut. The hairstylist did her best. She snipped carefully, aware of every uneven edge in the scissors. She showed the woman the result. The customer didn't complain. She paid a small amount, not much more than pocket change, and left. The hairstylist counted the bills and coins. It was far less than she needed, but it was something. As afternoon light dimmed, she locked the door and lowered the metal grate, though not completely. She sat on the old wooden step at the entrance, resting her elbows on her knees. The sky had a dull glow. She could hear distant honks and someone arguing inside a nearby building. She tried not to think about the next day, or the day after. She had no plan yet. She had tried everything. She worked hard. She sold sweets at night. She cut hair for pennies. It never seemed enough. Soon, she stood up and went back inside. She closed the door fully now and counted her supplies again. She had enough shampoo and conditioner for a few more weeks. Her scissors were getting dull. She didn't have the money to replace them. She brushed some loose hair from one of the chairs and sighed. She ran her hand over the fabric, feeling every rip. She noticed how quiet it was. No one was there to talk to. She felt alone. As evening approached, the hairstylist decided to leave. She would pick up her daughter and head back to their small apartment. Maybe they could share some bread. Maybe tomorrow would bring more customers. She grabbed her keys and stepped outside. She closed the door, locked it, and tested the handle. It was secure. She looked down the street. The light was fading. She glanced at the sign above her salon. The paint was chipped, and the letters were fading. She shrugged. There was nothing she could do now. She headed toward the school building where her daughter waited. The landlord would not bother her tonight if she was lucky. She would survive one more day. Tomorrow, she would wake early again, make weak coffee, and hope for a miracle. That was all she could do for now. "Mommy, can we have dinner?" her daughter asked as they headed home together. The hairstylist nodded. "We'll see what we have," she said. The child held her hand and did not protest. They walked in silence along the uneven sidewalk, avoiding puddles and cracks. When they reached their building, the hairstylist unlocked the door and guided her daughter upstairs. She placed the few coins she had earned today on the table and looked at them. It was nothing close to the rent. She knew the landlord would demand payment soon, and she had no idea how to provide it. She fixed a small meal. The child ate slowly, asking no questions. After that, they prepared to sleep. Another day had ended. The hairstylist lay down, staring at the dark ceiling. She listened to the muffled sounds of neighbors downstairs. She tried not to think too much. Tomorrow was another day. She would do her best again. The next morning, the hairstylist woke up before her daughter. She got dressed quickly. She gave the child a piece of bread and a weak coffee, then walked her to the small school down the block. After that, she hurried to her salon. It was still early. The metal grate was stuck. She pulled it hard and finally got it open. Inside, everything looked the same as yesterday. She arranged her combs and scissors, turned on the single light bulb overhead, and waited. The air felt heavy. She glanced at the street. No one was passing by yet. She stood behind the old chair, checking if the mirror was clean. She froze when she heard footsteps outside. They were firm, heavy steps, moving straight toward her door. She tried to ignore them at first, but the sound grew louder. She knew it was the landlord. He never knocked gently. She stepped forward and opened the door halfway, trying to greet him before he forced his way inside. He pushed the door open with his arm and stepped in without waiting for her permission. He stood in the center of the small salon, scanning the room. He wore a stiff shirt, pressed pants, and polished shoes. He ran a hand through his thin hair and frowned at her. "Rent," he said, not wasting words. His voice was rough. He wanted his money now. She swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't have the full amount yet. I'm trying. Please give me more time." He rolled his eyes. "Time," he said. "You've had plenty of time. I've been patient. You're late again." She tried to explain. "I'm barely getting any customers. I'm doing everything I can." He didn't care. He moved closer, looking down at her. "I want the rent by the end of this week. If you don't have it, you're out. No excuses." She noticed his mouth twist as he spoke, his tone dismissive. She tried one more time. "I have a daughter. I just need a little more time." He laughed. It wasn't a friendly sound. "That's your problem," he said. "Not mine. Pay or leave." He stepped back, looked around the salon as if it disgusted him, then headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned and said, "I might raise it next month. Maybe it's time for someone else to rent this place." She stood there after he left, staring at the door. Her hands shook. She felt something raw in her chest. She tried to calm her breathing, but it was difficult. She walked over to the small counter and leaned against it. She felt humiliated. He didn't even treat her like a person. Her mind buzzed with fear. She thought about her daughter. Where would they go if he kicked them out? She brushed a strand of hair from her face and looked around the empty salon. She had no solution. She wanted to cry, but nothing came out. She tried to open early to catch customers on their way to work, but no one arrived. She sat behind her counter, tapping her fingers on the wood. She had to think. Maybe she could sell more sweets at night, or cut prices even lower. That thought made her stomach clench. She was barely earning anything as it was. She considered giving up. Maybe closing the salon would be better than living under constant threat. But then she pictured her daughter's face. The child deserved at least some stability. If she gave up now, what would they have? Time passed slowly. The sun rose higher, and the light from outside spread across the worn tiles. She felt hungry, but she had nothing to eat. She sipped tap water in the bathroom and tried to ignore the emptiness in her belly. She checked the time. Almost noon. She had no customers. She rubbed her forehead. She had thought maybe a walk-in might save the day. Nothing so far. She ran a hand over her supplies. The shampoo bottles felt light. She needed more, but had no money. She tried to sit still and not panic. In the early afternoon, a single customer finally stepped inside. It was a middle-aged woman wearing a faded dress. She looked uncertain, but she had hair that clearly needed trimming. "How much for a simple cut?" she asked quietly. The hairstylist named a price so low it barely covered anything. The woman agreed and sat down. The hairstylist washed her hair with weak water pressure and a cheap product. She combed it out and cut carefully, trying not to show how nervous she felt. Her hands were steady enough. The customer did not complain. When the woman left, she paid with a few small bills and some coins. It was better than nothing. The hairstylist counted the money and put it aside. She would use it to buy bread for her daughter. She looked at the clock. The day was moving fast, and she had earned almost nothing. She tried not to think about the rent. She wiped the chair and the mirror, cleaning up loose hair from the floor. Outside, cars honked. A few people walked by, but no one else entered. She felt hunger gnaw at her again. She had not eaten. She considered closing for a moment to buy something cheap at the bakery. But if she left, what if a customer showed up and found the salon closed? She remained inside, staring at the door. No one came. She took another sip of water. She pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to ignore the pang. There was nothing else she could do. As the afternoon turned into early evening, she realized the day was almost over. She thought about her daughter. The girl would be waiting at home with an empty stomach. She needed to buy something to eat. She couldn't starve the child. She decided to close the salon soon. She hoped maybe someone would show up at the last minute. But nobody did. She locked the door at dusk, feeling drained. She had earned a handful of small bills for the entire day. Nowhere near enough for rent. She would have to try again tomorrow, and the next day, until the landlord kicked them out. She gripped the door handle, making sure it was locked tight, then walked away. The street felt lonely. She headed toward her apartment. On the way, she stopped at a corner store and bought cheap bread and a small carton of milk. It cost most of what she earned that day. She carried the items back home. When she stepped inside the apartment, her daughter ran up to her. "Mom, are we eating?" the girl asked. The hairstylist nodded. She prepared a simple meal. They sat at the small table, eating in silence. The child did not ask about the salon, and the mother did not mention the landlord. After they finished, the little girl played quietly with a worn-out doll in the corner. The hairstylist watched her, feeling a pressure behind her eyes. She wanted to scream, but there was no point. She would try again tomorrow. She put her daughter to bed and turned off the single lamp in their room. She lay down on the floor mattress. She closed her eyes, thinking about ways to earn money. She considered selling more sweets or offering discounts. Maybe she could stand outside and call people in. But she feared looking desperate. The landlord's voice echoed in her mind. Pay or leave. She felt tired. She had survived one more day. That was all she could do. That night, she slept restlessly. The next morning, she woke before dawn. She dressed quietly, trying not to disturb her daughter, and left the apartment with a small bag of homemade sweets. She planned to sell them after closing the salon. She had to find any way to earn extra money. Her daughter was still sleeping when she stepped out onto the street. She walked fast, carrying the small bag close to her chest. The air felt damp and the pavement was uneven beneath her shoes. She delivered her daughter to school in silence and headed to the salon. Inside, everything looked the same. She checked her combs, scissors, and cheap products. Her stomach growled. She had no time for breakfast. She waited, door open, hoping someone would come in early. No one did. She leaned against the counter, watching the empty street through the half-open door. Around mid-morning, a single customer came. It was a young man who needed a quick trim. He paid a small amount. She thanked him and tried to stay pleasant. He left without extra words. She waited for more customers, but none arrived. By noon, she felt the familiar hunger. She took small sips of tap water, then sat on the old chair and stared at the door. She pressed her hand against her stomach. She needed to last until evening. She would try selling sweets later, maybe on a busier street. Maybe that would help. Late afternoon brought a second customer, a teenage girl who wanted a cheap haircut before meeting friends. The hairstylist cut carefully and received a few coins in return. Not enough for the rent. Still, she thanked the girl and swept the floor. She checked the time. Soon, the school would let out. She thought about her daughter, always waiting, always patient. The hairstylist decided to close early today, pick up her daughter, and head to a place she thought might have more foot traffic to sell sweets. She locked the door and walked to the school. The child greeted her with a small smile. "Are we going home?" the girl asked. The hairstylist shook her head. "Not yet," she said quietly. "I have to sell these." She showed the bag of sweets. The girl nodded. They walked side by side, heading to an area a few blocks uphill. The street was poorly lit, the sidewalk cracked. The hairstylist held her daughter's hand tightly. When they reached the top of a small slope, the hairstylist looked around. There were few people. She saw a cheap bar, a rundown store, and some parked cars. She approached strangers and asked if they would like to buy sweets. Most ignored her. Some shook their heads and walked away. A few glanced at the child and looked uncomfortable, but they still did not buy. Her daughter stood nearby, silent, watching her mother's attempts fail. The hairstylist tried not to show frustration. She forced a polite tone as she offered the sweets. "Would you like some?" she asked a man who passed by. He shrugged and kept walking. She asked a group of 2 women. They said no. She tried again with a young couple. They looked at her with pity, but did not buy anything. She felt the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, I'm tired," the child said quietly. The hairstylist nodded. "Just a bit more," she said. She moved along the street, speaking softly, keeping her voice steady. As darkness fell, she realized she had sold almost nothing. The lights were dim, and only a few people passed. She felt a lump in her throat. Her feet ached. Her daughter's eyelids looked heavy. She decided to head home soon. She needed to try one last time, maybe down the next block. She gripped the bag and walked slowly along the narrow sidewalk. The street sloped upward again, and the effort made her legs burn. She reached another corner and stopped. Hardly anyone was around. She held up the bag silently for a moment. No one approached. She lowered her arm. Her daughter rubbed her eyes. The hairstylist realized it was pointless. She had tried her best. She turned around and started walking back downhill toward home. Just then, a car appeared at the top of the street. Its headlights cast a harsh light on her and her daughter. The hairstylist blinked, raising her hand to shield her eyes. The car slowed as it passed them. She saw a man inside, well-dressed, watching her carefully. She didn't recognize him. She looked away, unsure why he was staring. He drove on, but then she heard the engine slow again. She tried to ignore the car and kept walking, holding her daughter's hand. The vehicle stopped a short distance ahead. The driver lowered the window, but he didn't call out. He just watched. She didn't approach him. She had no reason to. If he wanted sweets, he would say something. He did not. After a moment, the car moved on and disappeared around a corner. The hairstylist shook her head, unsure what to make of it. She reached a small grocery store that was about to close. She stepped inside and used the few coins she had to buy some bread. Then she headed home. Inside the apartment, she helped her daughter change into sleeping clothes. The child was exhausted and fell asleep quickly. The hairstylist sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall. She thought about the day. Another failure. Another day closer to eviction. Another night of uncertainty. She remembered the car and the man inside. He looked different from the people in her neighborhood. He looked important, wealthy, maybe. Why had he watched her like that? She knew people sometimes stared at anyone selling things on the street, but his gaze felt different. She shrugged to herself. It made no difference. Tomorrow, she would try again. She had no other choice. Outside, she could hear distant voices and a barking dog. She ate a piece of bread and drank tap water. Then she lay down on her mattress, pulling a thin blanket over her. She felt her muscles ache from walking up and down the street. She remembered the landlord's threat, the empty salon, the customers who paid almost nothing, the sweets that didn't sell. She thought of her daughter's tired face. She would not give up. She had to survive somehow. As she drifted into a restless sleep, the image of the car and the well-dressed man passed through her mind again. She pushed it away. It meant nothing. He was just a stranger passing by. She had more pressing problems. The next day, she would open the salon again. She would try to find a way to keep going. Maybe the landlord would give her a little more time. Maybe new customers would appear. Maybe she could sell the sweets in a better spot. She repeated these thoughts until she fell into a shallow sleep. She did not know that the man in the car was a wealthy real estate broker. She did not know that he felt compelled to see her again. She did not know he would come to her salon soon. She only knew that tomorrow would be another struggle, and she had to face it. The next morning, the hairstylist woke early. She prepared a small cup of cheap coffee for herself and a half slice of bread for her daughter. After helping the girl get ready for school, she walked her there as usual. The sun had barely risen. She tried not to think about the landlord or the unpaid rent. She tried not to think about the dull ache in her stomach. She would open the salon, stand behind the chair, and hope for customers. She had no other plan. At the salon, she opened the metal grate and stepped inside. She flicked on the overhead light. The place looked the same as always. Old chairs, cheap hair products, cracked mirror, and a silent emptiness. She arranged her combs and scissors. She made sure the floor was clean and the chair was wiped down. She waited by the entrance, the door open, hoping someone would come in. She looked outside, seeing a few people pass by without stopping. Around mid-morning, a car pulled up across the street. The hairstylist noticed it because it looked expensive and unfamiliar. The door opened. The same man from last night's street encounter stepped out. He wore a neat shirt, good shoes, and held himself with confidence. She recognized him now and felt a slight tension. He crossed the street and headed straight toward her door. She watched him approach. He did not hesitate. He stepped inside, nodding a brief greeting. "Good morning," he said, looking around the small salon. He seemed calm, observing the worn chairs and cheap products without making any remarks. She tried to remain polite. "Good morning. Can I help you?" Her voice was steady, though she wondered why he was here. He cleared his throat. "I was passing by. I saw you last night selling sweets on the street. That must be hard." She felt her cheeks warm. She shrugged. "It's what I have to do." He moved closer to the counter. "Do you run this place alone?" She nodded. "Yes, it's my salon." She saw him glance at the old furniture, the cracked mirror, and the meager tools of her trade. "I see," he said. "How is business?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not good. People around here don't have much money. I don't earn enough." She didn't know why she was telling him this. He was a stranger, after all, but his tone was not mocking. He looked at her closely. "Last night, you were selling sweets. Why do you need to do that?" She hesitated. "I need money," she said simply. "I have a daughter. The rent is overdue. The landlord wants me out if I don't pay soon." He nodded, as if understanding. "How much do you owe?" She shook her head. "More than I can manage. I don't have a number right now. I'm behind on several weeks. He's threatening to raise the rent or kick me out." The broker walked around the salon slowly, touching the back of a chair, inspecting the shelf with products. "So you struggle with rent, few customers, and no support. Is that right?" She nodded. "That's right." He turned to face her again. "I'm a real estate broker. I've seen many places, many businesses. Not everyone makes it." "How long have you been here?" She took a small breath. "A few years. I've tried to make it work. I tried lowering prices. I tried working more hours. It never seems enough." He noticed a small photo sticking out of a worn notebook on the counter. He nodded toward it. "Who's that?" She followed his gaze. "That's my daughter's father. He left a long time ago. He never came back." The broker's expression was neutral, but his eyes softened slightly. "I'm sorry," he said simply. She lifted the photo, showing the faded face of the man who abandoned them. "I keep this around for no reason. Maybe I just can't let go." The broker asked, "Do you have any help from family?" She shook her head. "No, it's just me and my daughter." He took a step forward, looking at her tools. "You cut hair well," she shrugged. "I do my best. I'm not fancy, but I know how to cut well enough. Customers never complain." He seemed to consider her words. "If you had a better place, in a better area, do you think you could earn more?" She blinked. "I never thought about it. I barely survive here. A better place would charge more rent, right?" He nodded. "True, but maybe you could attract better-paying customers. Maybe you wouldn't have to sell sweets at night. Maybe you could have a stable income." She looked down. "I don't know. I'm not sure I'd fit in anywhere fancy." He raised an eyebrow. "You said you do your best. That should count for something." She frowned. "What's your point?" He took a moment before answering. "I'm just thinking out loud. I see someone who works hard but is stuck in a place that offers no way forward." She let out a short breath. "That's my reality. I have no savings, no backup plan. I can't even pay the landlord here. How would I afford a better place?" He looked at her directly. "Sometimes people need a push, some help." She felt suspicious. "Help? From who?" He shrugged slightly. "From me, maybe. I don't mean a handout. I mean guidance. I know places. I know how to negotiate. Maybe we can find a small spot in a better area." She stared at him. "You don't even know my name." He gave a slight smile. "And you don't know mine. But sometimes people cross paths for a reason. I saw you last night. You looked determined, even though you were struggling. That made me curious. She narrowed her eyes. So, you want to help me move my business? He spread his hands. If you want. I'm not forcing you. I'm just saying it's possible. I can help you find something affordable but better than this. Her heart fluttered. She didn't know this man. He could be a scammer, but he seemed genuine. He wasn't making big promises. He was just stating facts. She looked around her salon, the cracked mirror, the old chairs, the cheap supplies. She thought about the landlord and his threats. She thought about her daughter and their uncertain future. She turned back to the broker. "Why would you do that?" she asked softly. He paused. "Sometimes I see situations that are unfair. You work hard. You care for your daughter. You are stuck here. Maybe I can help you break free. That's all." She folded her arms. "I have no money to pay your fee." He shook his head. "Let's deal with that later. For now, think about whether you want to try. We can check some listings. If you like one, we discuss terms." She considered his offer. "I'm not sure. I need time to think." He nodded. "Take your time. I'll come back soon. If you want to try, we will try. If not, I'll walk away." She felt a tightness in her throat. She wanted to trust him, but fear held her back. Still, what choice did she have? If she stayed here, the landlord would crush her. If she tried something new, maybe she had a chance. The broker turned to leave. Before stepping out, he asked, "What's your name?" She gave it, and he gave his. Then he walked out, leaving her alone in the quiet salon. She leaned on the counter, replaying the conversation in her mind. She looked at the empty chair. She had served only one customer this morning. She lifted her head and gazed at the door where he exited. She did not know if she could trust him, but she knew staying here meant disaster. Maybe tomorrow he would return. Maybe they would talk more. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, something like relief. Maybe this was her chance to escape this trap. The following morning, the hairstylist opened her salon as usual. She wiped the chairs and arranged the supplies, thinking about the broker's offer. She had not seen him again since yesterday. She wondered if he would return. She wondered if she could trust him. She spent the early hours doing small tasks, waiting for customers who never appeared. She felt the same tension building, the same emptiness inside the salon. Around mid-morning, no one had walked in. She stepped outside to get some air. The street smelled of old trash. She looked left and right, searching for any sign of new faces. Nothing. When she turned back, she saw the landlord at the end of the block. He was approaching with quick steps and a hard expression. She froze, then walked inside and stood behind her counter, waiting. He entered without knocking. "Where's my money?" he asked, voice blunt. She held her breath. "I don't have it yet," she said. He shook his head and walked around, tapping a finger on the old chair. "I warned you. Time is almost up," he said. She swallowed. "I'm trying. I've had few customers." He leaned forward. "Not my problem. If you don't pay by the end of the week, you're gone. I might raise the price anyway. Maybe I can sell this place to someone who will pay on time." She felt a rush of panic. Her heart pounded. She tried to speak calmly. "Please, give me a few more days. I'll find a solution. I'm working on it." He smirked. "Working on what? You have nothing here. Who wants a cheap haircut in this dump?" Maybe it's time you understood you can't handle this. Close up and leave." She clenched her jaw. "I'm not giving up." He chuckled. "We'll see," he said, stepping back and leaving. She watched him go, feeling nauseous. All her fears rushed back. The broker's words felt distant. She was alone, with a looming eviction. She had to pick up her daughter soon. Maybe she could think more clearly later. She waited a bit longer in the salon, hoping a customer might drop by. No one did. She locked up and headed toward the school. The landlord's voice echoed in her mind. At the school, she found her daughter sitting on a small bench, holding her worn backpack. The child looked up and smiled weakly. "Are we going home?" she asked. The hairstylist nodded. They walked in silence, hand in hand, dodging broken pavement and puddles of dirty water. Once they reached their apartment, the child placed her backpack on a chair. "Mom, you look upset," the girl said. The hairstylist tried to force a calm tone. "I'm fine," she lied. The girl frowned. "You never smile anymore." "Did I do something wrong?" The mother swallowed hard. "No, sweetie. You did nothing wrong. Things are just hard right now." The girl tilted her head. "You're always worried. You never have time to talk. You're mad at me." The hairstylist shook her head quickly. "No, I'm not mad. I love you. I'm just trying to fix things." The child's eyes filled with confusion. "Then why don't we have nice food? Why is the salon so empty? Are we going to have to leave?" Hearing these questions hurt. The hairstylist took a shallow breath. "I'm doing everything I can. Don't worry," she said, but her voice sounded weak. The girl's face fell. She looked away, fiddling with a corner of her backpack. The silence between them stretched. The hairstylist tried to break it. "I'll get us something to eat soon," she said. The child nodded but didn't smile. The hairstylist felt a burning tension in her chest. She wanted to reassure her daughter, but what could she say? She had no guarantees. She decided to return to the salon in the afternoon and try again. Maybe someone would show up later. She told her daughter to stay home and wait. The girl hesitated, then agreed quietly. The hairstylist left, feeling guilty. Back at the salon, the afternoon light was harsh and unforgiving. She opened the door and stood inside, staring at the empty chairs. She thought about quitting. If she closed the salon, then what? Selling sweets at night wouldn't cover rent. Maybe she could find another job, but who would hire her? She remembered the broker's words. He said maybe there were better places. Maybe she could attract more customers elsewhere. But how could she move without money? She leaned against the counter. Time passed. No one came. She considered just closing early and going home, but she stayed. Around dusk, as she was about to lock up, she saw a familiar figure approaching. The broker stepped inside, nodding at her. He wore the same neat clothes and had a calm demeanor. He looked around, noticing the emptiness. "No customers today?" he asked. She shook her head. He approached slowly. "Have you thought about my suggestion?" She sighed. "I have no money. The landlord is threatening me again. I can't even pay for a better place." The broker crossed his arms. "I understand, but maybe we can look for something small, cheaper than you think. I know how to find a decent spot at a good price." She looked at him, doubtful. "And then what? I go broke trying to pay rent again?" He raised a hand, palm up. "I'm not offering a miracle, just help. If you move to a place where customers pay more, you might cover rent easily. You might even have money left." She shook her head. "I'm used to this area. If I move, who will come to me?" He shrugged. "Better neighborhoods have people who pay well for services. If you're good at what you do, they won't mind a small new salon. They'll try you out. If they like your work, they'll stay." She thought of her worn scissors, her cheap products. "I can't afford fancy supplies," she said. He nodded. "Start small. Just a cleaner place and a stable environment might be enough to attract better clients. Then, when you earn more, you can improve step by step." She rubbed her forehead. "The landlord wants me out. I have no time." He looked at her steadily. "We can move fast. Let me show you some places tomorrow. If you find something you can afford, we sign a lease. I'll help negotiate." She pressed her lips together. "Why do you care?" He answered simply. "I saw how hard you work. It's not fair that you're stuck here. I can't guarantee success, but I can give you a real chance." She exhaled slowly. She remembered her daughter's questions, the landlord's threats, the empty chairs. She had no reason to trust this man except that he seemed honest and had no reason to lie. She had nothing else to lose. "Fine," she said, voice quiet. "Show me tomorrow." He nodded. "Good. I'll come by in the morning. We'll check a few places. You can decide." She locked the door behind them and stepped out onto the sidewalk with him. The street was empty. He offered no further promises. Just a small nod before leaving. She watched him go, then turned toward her apartment. Back home, she found her daughter sitting quietly. The child looked up. "Did you find a customer?" the girl asked. The hairstylist shook her head. "No, not today, but maybe tomorrow." The child looked tired. The hairstylist forced a small smile. "We might try something new soon," she said. The girl didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. They shared a piece of bread and some water. The hairstylist put her daughter to bed. Before sleeping, she lay awake, thinking of tomorrow. She pictured walking into a new space, maybe with cleaner floors and better lighting. Maybe people would pay for her work. Maybe she could afford food and pay the rent on time. Maybe she could breathe without fear. She closed her eyes and tried not to hope too much. But she couldn't help it. She had agreed to try. She would see what happened. The next day, the hairstylist woke early and got her daughter ready for school. She walked the girl there, said goodbye, and returned to the salon. She felt uneasy. The broker said he would come by this morning. She opened the metal grate and stepped inside, arranging her tools as if everything were normal. She tapped her foot, waiting. After an hour with no customers, she thought maybe he would not appear. Then she heard a sound outside. It was him, standing at the door, holding a notepad. "Ready?" he asked, stepping inside. She nodded slowly. "I guess so," she said. He gestured toward the street. "I have a few places lined up. They're not huge, but they're in better neighborhoods. The prices might surprise you." She hesitated. "What if they're too expensive?" He shrugged. "We can negotiate. Let's at least look." She locked the salon door. He walked beside her, guiding her to his car parked nearby. She had never been in such a nice car. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. They drove out of her familiar streets. She watched the scenery change. The roads got smoother, the houses looked cleaner, and the shops had better signs. He parked near a small commercial building. "This is the first one," he said. They got out. It was a small storefront with a glass door. Inside, it was empty but brighter than her old salon. The floors were cleaner, and the walls had fresh paint. She imagined her chairs, her supplies. It felt strange. "How much?" she asked, keeping her voice low. The broker named a figure that made her frown. "That's too high," she said. He nodded. "I can try to bring it down. Also, consider that even 2 customers here might pay more than 4 customers there. You can charge a bit more for your services." She looked around again. "I don't know," she said. "Let's see another one," he replied calmly. They visited a second spot a few blocks away. It was a bit smaller, with only one main room and a tiny back area, but it had a nice large window facing the street. More importantly, it was cheaper. She felt slightly less tense when she heard the price. She tried to imagine customers coming in, paying enough for her to cover rent on time. She ran her fingers along the wall and took a slow breath. "I could maybe work with this," she said. He nodded. "We can still negotiate. If you say yes, I'll talk to the owner and try to get a discount for the first few months." She looked at him. "Why would the owner do that?" He explained. "Sometimes owners would rather have a stable tenant at a slightly lower rent than no tenant at all. If I mention you're reliable, they might agree." She tilted her head. "I haven't been reliable with my current landlord." He raised an eyebrow. "Your current situation is different. This place has better conditions. You'll have a better chance to earn enough. Trust me." They went to see a third location, but it was too large and out of her price range. After that, he drove her back toward her old neighborhood. During the ride, she looked down at her hands. "If I move, I have to leave behind whatever few customers I have," she said. He replied, "You said yourself you barely have any. If you attract just a handful here, but they pay well, it might balance out." She sighed. "True. I'm just worried." He parked near her salon. She noticed the landlord's car at the corner and felt a wave of dread. She turned to the broker. "I need to decide soon. The landlord is not giving me much time." He nodded. "I'll contact the owner of the second place and see if we can secure a lower rent for a few months. If I succeed, I'll let you know. Then you can decide. But remember, staying here isn't working." She agreed. "I know." They said goodbye, and she watched him drive off. She unlocked her salon and stepped inside. She felt a strange tension. Change scared her, but so did staying here. She glanced at the worn chairs, the cracked mirror, and the empty waiting area. She stayed open for a few hours. Only one man came by, asking for a trim. He paid, but it was not much. She thanked him anyway. When she closed the salon at dusk, she found the landlord waiting outside. "So, any money for me?" he asked, arms folded. She shook her head. "Not yet," she said quietly. He snorted. "I'm done waiting. By the end of the week, you either pay all you owe or you leave." She swallowed hard. "I'm trying to find a solution," she said. He rolled his eyes. "What solution? Your salon's empty. You have no customers." "This is a waste of space." She clenched her fists. "I'm doing what I can. Give me a few more days." He stepped closer, glaring at her. "I said end of the week, not a day more. If I don't get paid, I'm locking you out. Understand?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He walked away. She watched him go, feeling a hollow ache in her stomach. She wondered if the broker could really help. If he failed, she would lose everything. She headed home, feeling heavy. At her apartment, her daughter greeted her quietly. The hairstylist prepared a small meal of bread and water. As they ate, the child looked at her with worried eyes. "Mom, why are you sad?" the girl asked. The hairstylist pressed her lips. "Things are hard, sweetie." But I'm trying something new. Maybe we'll have a better place." The girl frowned. "A new salon?" The hairstylist nodded. "Yes, maybe in a nicer area. Maybe we'll have more customers and can buy better food." The child nodded slowly. "That sounds good." The hairstylist tried to smile. "It does," she said, though uncertainty twisted in her chest. After the meal, she put her daughter to bed and sat alone on the floor, leaning against the wall. She thought about the second location they saw. It was small, but clean. She imagined painting the walls, placing her equipment, welcoming customers who would pay a fair price. She wanted to believe it would work out. The next morning, she planned to open the salon again, but her mind was on the broker's call. Would he get a discount? Would she be able to afford the new place? Would the landlord give her time to move out without throwing her into the street? She tried not to think too far ahead, but it was impossible. She was betting everything on a stranger's help and her own ability to adapt. Still, she had no choice. If she stayed, she would fail. If she tried something new, maybe she had a chance. That was enough to keep her moving forward. She would wait for the broker's news. If he succeeded, she would take the leap. If not, she would figure something else out. But at least now she had an option she never had before. Early the next morning, the hairstylist opened her salon as usual. She paced inside, checking her phone every few minutes, though she knew the broker would come in person. The hours passed slowly. She had no customers. She counted the coins she had, trying to imagine if it would be enough to move. Probably not. She sighed and adjusted the old chair, waiting. Close to midday, she heard footsteps outside. The broker entered, holding a folded piece of paper. "Good news," he said, keeping his voice calm. She straightened, heart pounding. "You got a discount?" He nodded. "Yes, I spoke to the owner. He agreed to lower the rent for the first 3 months. It's still not cheap, but it's much better than before." She swallowed. "How much?" He gave her the new figure. It was still higher than what she paid now, but not by much. Maybe she could manage if she got customers who paid more. She exhaled slowly. "I don't have a deposit," she said, voice tense. He nodded. "I know. But the owner agreed to let you pay the deposit in 2 parts. Half now, half next month." She felt relief and fear mixing inside her. She had to find half a deposit from somewhere. She rubbed her forehead. "I have to leave this place anyway," she said quietly. "If I stay, the landlord will kick me out by the end of the week. Maybe I can sell some items here, or borrow a little from someone." She had no one to borrow from, but maybe she could sell the old chairs for a few bills. The broker studied her face. "If you want, I can help cover the initial deposit. You can pay me back later." She looked at him sharply. "Why would you trust me?" He shrugged. "I told you, I don't like seeing someone trapped. I believe you'll pay me back once you start earning. Think of it as a loan between acquaintances." She hesitated, feeling vulnerable. But what choice did she have? No one else offered help. "All right," she said, "but I will pay you back. I promise." He nodded. "I know." She looked around her empty salon. She owned very little of value. Maybe she could leave most of it behind. The new place was smaller but better. She didn't want to bring these old chairs and cracked mirror if she could help it. Maybe she could buy second-hand chairs in better condition later. "When do I move?" she asked. The broker said, "As soon as possible. If you sign the lease tomorrow, you can start moving in immediately. The sooner you open there, the sooner you earn money." She ran a hand over the worn counter. I have to tell my landlord I'm leaving." The broker frowned. "Will he give you trouble?" She shrugged. "He might, but there's nothing he can do if I'm gone before the end of the week. I'll just pack my tools and go. He can keep whatever junk is left." They agreed to meet tomorrow morning at the new place. The broker would bring the contract. She would bring what little money she had for her share of the deposit. He would cover the rest, and she would owe him. After he left, she stood alone again. She felt both fear and a hint of hope. She was leaving this worn-out salon behind. No more cheap clients who paid almost nothing. Maybe now she could aim higher. She locked up early and walked home, deep in thought. That evening, she told her daughter the plan. "We're moving the salon to another area," she said. The child looked curious. "Is it nice?" The hairstylist nodded. "Nicer than here. Maybe we'll get more money, buy better food. No more selling sweets at night." The girl smiled a little. "That's good," she said. They ate their simple meal of bread and water. The hairstylist could not sleep well that night. She worried about the deposit, about attracting new clients, about repaying the broker. But at least she had a path forward. Staying here meant certain failure. This new place gave her a chance, even if small. The next morning, she woke early, dropped her daughter at school, and walked to her old salon. She entered quietly, looking around one last time. She took her scissors, combs, and a small box of products she could carry. She decided to leave the chairs behind. They were too old. She had no customers today, and even if someone showed up, it didn't matter. She would not be here tomorrow. A few hours later, she saw the landlord's car. He stomped inside. "Where's my rent?" he demanded. She stood by the counter, calm. "I'm leaving," she said. He squinted. "What?" she repeated. "I'm leaving. You can have this place." "I can't pay your rent," he laughed. "You're running away." She shook her head. "No, I'm just moving on. Keep the chairs, whatever's left. I'm done here." He stepped closer. "You think you can just leave without paying what you owe?" She swallowed. "I owe you, yes, but I have no money. I'm leaving this place. You can rent it to someone else or sell it." He glared at her, eyes cold. "You'll never get far," he spat. "You're nobody. You'll fail again." She felt a knot in her stomach but stayed calm. "That's my business." He kicked one of the old chairs, making it wobble. "Get out, then. Don't let me see you here again." She nodded, grabbed her small box of tools, and stepped outside. She did not look back. Her heart raced as she walked away, but she felt lighter somehow. She headed toward the new neighborhood, the one where the broker said she could start fresh. She arrived at the new location around midday. The broker was waiting by the door with some papers. "Got everything?" he asked. She held up her box of tools and a small bag with her personal items. "This is all I have." He nodded and unlocked the door. Inside, it looked empty but bright. The walls were white, and the floor was clean. There was a small back room she could use for storage. She noticed how quiet it was, but in a good way. No peeling paint, no cracked mirror. She would need to get new chairs and a mirror, but maybe she could find decent used ones at a market. They sat on the floor, and he laid out the contract. He explained the terms simply. She would pay a reduced rent for 3 months, then normal rent after that. He gave her the receipt for the deposit. She gave him all the money she had. He covered the rest, making a note that she owed him. She signed the contract with a shaky hand. He signed as a witness. It was done. She looked around. This was her new salon now. She had nothing but her tools, some cheap products, and a lot of hope. The broker stood up, slipping the contract into a folder. "I'll leave you to it," he said. "You should try to open as soon as possible." She nodded. "I will." He headed to the door. Before leaving, he turned and said, "I believe you can make this work. Just stay steady." After he left, she walked slowly through the empty space. She imagined a chair in the middle, a mirror on the wall, maybe a small shelf for products. She pictured customers sitting down, handing her fair payment, leaving satisfied. She would buy fresh bread and milk for her daughter. She would pay rent on time. Maybe one day she would upgrade her tools. Maybe she could even repay the broker soon. For now, she had a roof over her business, a chance to earn more, and no landlord breathing down her neck. It was a start. She would return home, get her daughter, and tomorrow she would look for a decent chair and a mirror. The next day, she would open her new salon. No more waiting for miracles. She would make it work. The next morning, the hairstylist woke with a sense of urgency. She had her daughter eat a small breakfast of bread and milk, then walked her to school. Afterward, she headed straight to her new salon. She carried a few small items, a cheap mirror she bought at a discount store, a second-hand chair she had found the night before, and a couple of slightly better quality hair products. It was not perfect, but it looked better than her old place. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The sunlight came in through the front window, illuminating the freshly painted walls. She placed the mirror on the wall, adjusting it until it looked straight. She put the chair in the center of the room. It was small but sturdy. She arranged her scissors, combs, and products on a makeshift shelf. She took a deep breath, opened the door, and waited. It felt strange to stand here with nothing familiar. She had no past customers walking in. She had no well-known neighbors to say hello. She looked outside and saw people passing by on the sidewalk. They dressed better, seemed more relaxed, and appeared to have more money to spend. She hoped at least one would stop and check her services. After about an hour, a woman in her 30s paused outside, peering through the window. The hairstylist forced a friendly nod. The woman opened the door. "Are you open?" she asked. The hairstylist nodded. "Yes, I just opened here. Would you like a haircut?" The woman hesitated, looking around. The place was simple, but clean. "How much?" she asked. The hairstylist named a price slightly higher than what she used to charge. It was still reasonable for this area. The woman agreed and sat down. As the hairstylist cut, she focused on being careful, gentle, and precise. She combed smoothly, snipped evenly, and checked the mirror often. The customer said nothing for a while, then asked, "How long have you been here?" The hairstylist admitted this was her first day at this location. The woman raised an eyebrow. "First day, huh? You cut well." The hairstylist thanked her. When she finished, the customer examined her hair in the mirror and smiled slightly. "Looks good," she said. She paid without complaining, and even left a small tip. The hairstylist watched the customer leave, feeling a tightness release inside her chest. She had earned more from one haircut here than 2 or 3 haircuts at her old place. Maybe this would work after all. She straightened the chair and waited for the next customer. A man in a business suit walked by next. He glanced in, then kept walking. She tried not to feel discouraged. Another woman passed, holding a shopping bag, but did not stop. The hairstylist decided to stand near the door, not calling out, but appearing ready. After a while, another customer, A young woman with stylish clothes stopped and entered. "Do you do trims and simple styling?" she asked. The hairstylist nodded quickly. "Yes, I can help you." This customer seemed more demanding, pointing out exactly how she wanted her hair shaped. The hairstylist listened carefully and did her best to follow every instruction. The young woman watched each movement closely. After finishing, the customer studied her reflection, touched her hair, and nodded approval. She paid the asked price and left. No tip this time, but the hairstylist was happy anyway. She had met the customer's standards. Throughout the day, she served a few more clients. Not many, but enough to cover some basic expenses. They all paid rates she only dreamed of earning at her old salon. She felt her nerves calming. She realized that here, people expected to pay more, and as long as she did a decent job, they wouldn't complain. She did her best on every haircut, focusing on neatness and speed without rushing. By late afternoon, she had served 5 customers. At her old place, 5 customers in one day was rare, and they never paid as much. She counted her earnings secretly behind the counter and felt a small smile form on her face. It was enough to buy groceries without worry, maybe even a small treat for her daughter. She would pay back the broker as soon as she could. For now, she just needed to build a steady clientele. As she swept the floor, she heard a familiar voice. The broker stood in the doorway, a neutral expression on his face. "Busy day?" he asked. She shrugged. "Not a crowd, but enough. I earned more today than I did in 2 or 3 days at my old place." He nodded. "That's good. Keep it up. Word will spread if you keep doing good work." She wanted to thank him, but she was not good with words. She just said, "I appreciate what you did. I'll pay you back." He waved a hand. "Focus on your business first. I'm sure you'll make it work." He glanced around. "You'll probably want better furniture soon. Maybe a nicer mirror. But one step at a time." She agreed, feeling a quiet determination. This was just the beginning. After he left, she served one more customer before closing time. It was a quick trim and earned her another good amount. She locked up the door as the sun began to set. She carried her small bag of tools and the money she earned today. She headed toward her daughter's school, feeling more secure than she had in months. She picked up her daughter, who asked, "How was the new salon?" The hairstylist smiled. "It went well. I had customers who paid enough. We can buy better food tonight." The child's eyes lit up. "Really?" The hairstylist nodded. They walked to a nearby store and bought fresh bread, some vegetables, and even a small carton of milk. The girl grinned, holding the bags as they headed home. Back at their apartment, they ate together. The daughter noticed that her mother seemed calmer, less tense. "You're not sad now," the girl said. The hairstylist nodded. "Because now we have a chance. We can pay bills on time, maybe get better clothes for you, and I won't have to sell sweets at night." The girl smiled widely. After dinner, the hairstylist sat on the floor, counting her earnings. It felt strange to have enough money for basic things without panicking. She still owed the broker, but that was okay. She could handle that once she built a steady routine. For now, she had a roof for her business, stable customers, and no landlord breathing down her neck. She felt relief in her muscles and could finally relax a bit. As night fell, she lay down and closed her eyes. She thought about the old salon, the broken chairs, the landlord's threats, the empty days with no customers. That was behind her now. She was in a better place, literally and figuratively. She still had challenges ahead, but at least now she had a fair chance to overcome them. She whispered goodnight to her daughter and fell asleep without the usual knot of fear in her stomach. Tomorrow, she would open the salon again, serve more customers, and keep improving. She had proven to herself that she could survive in a new environment. Now it was time to thrive. Over the following weeks, the hairstylist settled into a steady routine. She opened the new salon early every morning after dropping her daughter at school. Customers came in at a decent pace. Some returned after their first haircut, bringing friends or neighbors. Others walked in out of curiosity and left satisfied. Each day, she earned enough to cover her expenses. She paid the rent on time. She bought better products and replaced her old scissors. She even managed to get a better mirror and a second chair. The place looked more welcoming now. Her daughter noticed the difference at home. The hairstylist brought fresh food regularly. They had milk and fruit. Sometimes they even had a small dessert after dinner. The girl stopped asking if they would move again. She relaxed and focused on her schoolwork. Her mother came home less tired and less worried. The hairstylist no longer sold sweets at night. She could rest after work. The landlord from the old place was nothing but a memory now. One afternoon, the broker dropped by. He stepped inside and saw the new chair, the improved products, and the small line of customers waiting their turn. "You're busy," he said quietly. She smiled. "Yes, things are going well. I'm making enough to save a little every week. I can pay back what I owe you soon." He leaned against the wall and shook his head. "No rush," he said, studying the room. "I'm glad to see this place thriving. You did this on your own." She finished cutting a client's hair, got paid, and then spoke to him between customers. "I wouldn't have made it without your help," she said. He shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. But you deserve the credit." As the weeks passed, he visited more often, sometimes just to say hello, other times to get a quick trim. They talked quietly between customers. He asked about her daughter. He asked if she had thought about hiring an assistant in the future. She laughed at the idea. "Maybe someday," she said. Soon, it felt natural that he would stop by after her closing time, sometimes bringing a small treat for her and her daughter. At first, the hairstylist felt cautious, but he showed no sign of pushing anything too fast. He was respectful and calm. They talked about business, about small improvements she could make, about other neighborhoods. She found herself looking forward to these visits. One evening, after she closed the salon and locked the door, they walked together to a nearby grocery store. She picked up a few items, and he carried the bags. When they reached her apartment building, he said, "I'm glad to see you stable. You seem happier." She nodded. "I am. Thank you." Before he left, he asked, "Dinner tomorrow? Just us and your daughter. If that's okay?" She felt a small warmth inside her chest. "Yes, that's okay," she said. The next night, he arrived with fresh bread and some fruit. She had prepared a simple meal. Her daughter greeted him politely. He helped set the table. The three of them ate quietly, talking about everyday things. He asked the girl about school. She answered shyly, but not afraid. The hairstylist noticed how relaxed the atmosphere felt. No tension, no fear of the next day's struggles. She realized how far she had come. Over time, he became a regular presence in their lives. He helped her negotiate better deals on supplies. He encouraged her to invest in a better sign for the salon. She slowly repaid the money she owed him. He never complained when it took longer than planned. By the time she handed him the final amount, they were already sharing more than just business interests. She eventually invited him to stay over. It was awkward at first, but her daughter seemed fine with it. The apartment was still small, but warmer and more comfortable than before. The hairstylist took pride in providing a stable home. She and the broker talked late into the night about simple things, what to do on weekends, which shops nearby had good prices, whether her daughter liked her new school shoes. They did not discuss the past much. It no longer mattered. At the salon, her clients kept returning, leaving good tips. Some praised her steady hand and calm demeanor. A few even asked if she had plans to expand. She said, not yet. She was happy with what she had. She had enough money to pay rent, buy good food, and keep the salon stocked. She could afford new clothes for her daughter. Life was no longer a desperate struggle. The broker moved in quietly, bringing only a few belongings. He still worked in real estate, sometimes leaving early and returning late. She understood. They both had responsibilities. But each evening, they came together in that small apartment, sharing a simple meal, talking about their day, and enjoying a calm routine. Her daughter accepted this new arrangement without fuss. The girl saw her mother happy and safe, and that was enough. Months passed. The hairstylist stood in her salon one afternoon, looking around. The walls were clean, the chairs comfortable, the mirror bright. Outside, the street was busy, and people glanced in curiously. She had loyal customers who trusted her skill. She had overcome obstacles that once seemed impossible. She thought about how she started, selling sweets at night, barely earning enough for rent, afraid of the landlord's threats. Now, those memories seemed distant. At closing time, she counted the day's earnings, satisfied. She locked the door and walked home, feeling the fading sunlight on her face. At the apartment, the broker was helping her daughter with a small homework assignment. She entered, put down her bag, and greeted them. They ate dinner together, something simple but tasty. After the meal, they sat quietly, talking about the day's events. The hairstylist's heart felt steady and calm. She knew life would never be perfect. There might be slow days at the salon, unexpected bills, small setbacks. But she had a stable base now, a real home, a business that paid its way, and a person who cared about her and her daughter. That was more than she ever dared to hope for. As the night wore on, she got ready for bed. Her daughter was already asleep. The broker sat by the small window, reading something on his phone. She touched his shoulder lightly, and he looked up. "Everything okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Everything's fine," she said, and she meant it. They turned off the lights. Tomorrow would be another day of work, customers, and steady progress. She was no longer trapped. She was free to live her life on her own terms. That was all she needed now. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen